All right, everybody. Hello. Welcome back. Thank you for joining me. Today, we're going to be talking about whiteness studies, white supremacy, these kinds of things. Still very much from a scientific perspective, very much from to my best ability and objective perspective. But whenever I lead with this kind of lecture, I always like to preface by saying that I am not white. I'm not a white person. I can't speak for white people on behalf of white people. I'm not the voice of white people. I don't try to come off as if I'm the voice of white people. And I certainly don't like to talk about the topic of whiteness in a sort of persecutory sense or anything like that. So I want to lead by acknowledging that I am not a white person. Having said that, uh, being a subject matter expert of racism in the context of anthropology, whiteness is certainly a relevant subfield for which there are lots of literary resources, academic resources on the topic. There are also lots of whiteness scholars. And so this particular topic and my ability to cover the range of ideas from this topic is both rooted in a synthesis of whiteness studies scholars, their work, but then also in my own development of an understanding of the synthesis of their work, advancing certain ideas that are contextually appropriate. And so hopefully you'll find today's lecture insightful. After I finish the lecture, obviously, we'll then turn over to the Q&A portion of the session, at which point you're welcome to ask me any questions. And I'll be the first to say, I would like to invite anybody who is listening on Instagram Live. If you're not aware, you can join in on this Zoom discussion by finding the link in my bio. I don't know. I'm still learning, so I'm building. You'll have to give me grace. I'm gonna start adding the Zoom links into my Patreon. Not the Patreon. I'm sorry, the link tree that you'll see in the link in my bio. So for those of you who maybe all you have is to be able to listen to the audio on my live stream, that's perfectly fine. But if you want to jump in and perhaps see the slides and then also ask questions during the Q&A portion, you're welcome to join me on Zoom. Anyway, let's go ahead and get started. Uh, there's a lot to cover, and I don't want to take too much time. Anyway, first of all, I like to ask this question because lots of people don't really know this. Were you even aware that whiteness studies was a formal academic field? A lot of people don't know that. They're aware of African American studies. They're aware of perhaps it's called Latino studies in some universities. Perhaps it's Chicano or Chicana studies. They're aware of Asian and Asian American studies, European studies, even. But the topic of whiteness is a concept that, first of all, is relatively new. And I'll tell you where it came from in a short little bit. I've also provided some resources so you can kind of get some background information on where whiteness studies comes from. Um, Whiteness studies as a formal academic field, first of all, comes from the concept of whiteness. You have to understand that whiteness was invented with the founding of the Americas, the colonies in the Americas. These people who wanted to distinguish themselves from their European counterparts needed a way to identify themselves as a collective body that was separate from Europeans. And so because there was this growing culture of enslavement for which a specific kind of person was being enslaved, predominantly by the Spaniards and by the Portuguese, which they called Los Negros or Os Negaos. I'm sorry, my Portuguese is very bad. The language of referring to these people as black was adopted. And so then by virtue of that language being adopted, the European settlers and colonizers figured that only naturally then should they just call themselves white. And so this is where the origin of the concept of whiteness even comes from. So when we talk about whiteness studies in the concept of like an academic field, we're not just talking about trying to persecute those people who identify as white and see if we can scientifically classify and pathologize their behavior, but rather we are closely examining how whiteness manifests in the social realm, how it influences social reality, how it influences political reality, and even how it influences just life for those people who are both white and non-white. How does whiteness function to produce a certain kind of life that other people, by virtue of not being white, don't necessarily have? And so this is where the field of whiteness studies comes from. In the anthropological context, you've probably seen a reel that I've posted and reposted on this topic. The whiteness studies in the anthropological context um, has a bit of a sort of, I want to say, an epistemological contention. For those of you who don't know what the word epistemology means, it means where you get your knowledge from, how you know that what you are drawing, what conclusions you're drawing are true, and where are you getting that information from, and how do you know what you know? It's that kind of thing. It comes from a contentious period in anthropology in which there were these scholars, anthropologists. First of all, anthropology is in fact a very white dominated field. And the motivation for anthropology is rooted from the 17th century. I talked about this in the first lecture. If you want to go back and watch that first lecture, it's posted on my Patreon, where there are lots of scholars that are interested in the origins of humanity. What does it mean for humanity to naturally exist in their own like natural habitats, ones that are not highly commodified and highly, just say, modified in general? Um, what does it look like for humans to exist in their natural environment? And so, sort of epistemological conundrum that comes from asking this kind of philosophical question is that it kind of places whiteness as being somehow separate from the realm of nature. That, like, to be white is like to somehow be outside of the realm of nature. And those people who are not white think of it almost in an unarticulated way as a function of their most natural and primal being, are like somehow more reflective of what it means to naturally be human than white people who are also human might be, right? And so then anthropology as a field is trying to understand humanity, where these people fit, how they live, what it means to be human in the most natural context. And so you have lots of white scholars, Napoleon Chagnon, Jacques Lizotte, Kenneth Good, for example, that are going into the indigenous Amazon and they're studying these people called the Yanomami. And the height of their career emerged around I want to say like, it's between the 80s and the 90s. There's an arbitrary period in there. Part of the reason is because I wasn't born in the 80s. I wasn't existing. I didn't exist in the 80s. So my knowledge is very limited. However, I have seen a number of read a number of their publications and seen a number of their documentaries. They're making all kinds of publications about these people, how they live, what it means to be them, their cultural values, learning their language, and they spend decades with these people. It's not like they fly down and they're spending time with these people for like, like 3 months, 6 months, or something like that. Like these people are devoting their lives to these people. So in some kind of way, they are introducing outside influence into the cultural contexts in which they are examining these people in their normal function in their daily lives. Napoleon Chagnon brought with him in an interesting kind of bias. In a lot of his publications, he's kind of sensationalizing these people for their ethnicity, for their otherness. He's calling them savages. He's trying to characterize them as if they're like intellectually inferior to his own scientific scholarship, for example. And what's interesting is that because these people don't speak English, they can't read English, to an extent, it creates a cultural line of separation where they don't have access to whatever he is and is not saying about them. More importantly, they're not making any assumptions that he's going to be mischaracterizing them in any kind of way. So on the Western side, on the American side of this whole phenomenon, you have a very interesting thing happening where he's basically just calling them like animals. Like, yes, they are human, but if I had to qualify the ways in which he's characterizing them without going into too much depth, I would almost describe it as he's kind of characterizing them as if they were like three-fifths of a human being, if you catch my drift, right? And so what's interesting is that if these people ever were to catch on to how he was describing them, they would be pissed off. It would be unavoidable. And to some extent, because he's culturally familiar with them, he's been spending decades with them, literally. years upon years of time, he's developed close personal relationships. He knows that if they ever found out about how he was writing about them, they probably would exile him from their life, from their society, right? And then another interesting phenomenon here is Kenneth Good, for example, in a very different way. Kenneth Good was an anthropologist that went down to the Yanomami and he spent lots of time with these people. And because their culture was fundamentally different from that of American culture, or what is currently on the debates on my page as Western culture, um, what is normative in these societies is that young girls, as young as 12 years old, are married off to other people, not necessarily adult men. They can be married off to other males that are boys that are of their age. But in general, once children hit the age of about 12 to 13, that's when they're getting married among these people. Because Kenneth Good had spent so much time with these people and earned their trust, they basically gifted him with a bride from their community. And so he ended up in a weird, interesting, political, social, contentious position in the Americas where he's now bringing home a child bride. And he has to explain to Americans that there are distinct cultural values. They haven't consummated the marriage. He's not doing anything like that, but they need to understand that this was a gift that he was given. It raised all kinds of problems around feminism, around equality, around cultural relativism and distinction. And from there, Yarima and Kenneth Good intentionally chose to live their lives together. It wasn't like this girl was just helpless. She intentionally went along with marrying this man. They eventually raised a family, and in raising a family, they had three different children. But eventually, Yarima just longed for going back home. She just wanted to be back where she felt like she belonged. And one of the things that she articulated before she left the US and even left behind her children with Kenneth Good was that human beings are not meant to spend their lives in boxes. And where Kenneth is from, wherever they spend their life, wherever they spend their time, they're always in a box. They sleep in boxes. Their beds are boxes. When they go from point A to point B, they're jumping in a box. And so she felt like she was very confined in a way that it didn't feel natural for her. So Yurima eventually returned back to Brazil and into the Amazon, and then later, in the years later, her children would then go to the Amazon to try to find her and reunite. So that's the picture that you're seeing here. And then there's Jacques Lizotte. Jacques Lizotte was a French anthropologist, very interesting for his time and not necessarily in a good way. Jacques Lizotte also spent decades with the Yanomami people, learned their language, became personally familiar with them. But in so doing, he had this very interesting thing about him where he would fondle the children of these tribes. And so, because these native people had no concept of pedophilia or kiddiddling or anything like that, it created an interesting phenomenon where they would talk to other Western people and tell them, yeah, for some reason he tells these kids to suck his blah blah blah, or he tries to touch these kids in these ways. And so Jacques Lizotte would try to downplay it. He was grilled at one point. He was put on the spotlight. He would say, "Oh no, they're lying. They're making things up and blah blah blah." But culturally, again, these people, even though child marriage is something that is normative for them, the sexualization of young people at this particular age is non-normative. So it became a thing where the French government is looking into this. They're trying to figure out who's lying and who's telling the truth. They ultimately side with Jacques Lizotte, saying that perhaps these people are making things up. They're looking to get something out of it. They're just kind of exploitative and blah blah blah. And so all three of these cases raised some very interesting philosophical conundrums about cultural difference, about human difference, about research, ethics, about all kinds of things. And one of the anthropological things that came up early around like the emergence of all of these things, this time period. If you want to look this up, there's a documentary called Secrets of the Tribe. You're welcome to watch it. It raised this issue about what does it mean to be an objective scholar out in the field? How can you be objective? And all of these researchers are kind of like bringing their own bias, their own Western bias, their own cultural bias into this, where they're positioning themselves. First of all, they inherently are given a unique set of power and privilege over the people that they're studying. But then, more importantly, the cultures that they're leaving behind when they go into these environments, they're just defaulting to whatever these men say, whatever these men do. They're putting their full and complete trust in them. And so it opens up this anthropological conundrum around, well, what does it even mean to be white? Because we're looking at all of these scholars as if they're free from bias, as if they're objective as science strives to be, and yet every single one of them introduces its own bias, their own human element by virtue of engaging with these people. So in the anthropological context, this is where you start getting the early seeds of whiteness studies. Um, and so, in whiteness studies, then, how is it that with all of these anthropological scholars, they're somehow repeating many of the same behaviors that would have been described of the colonizers from the of the people from the cultures that they belong to, right? And so that's where you open up kind of anthropological floodgates for examining whiteness and the function of whiteness in a socially meaningful context. Okay. And so from there, fast forward to the late 20th century. I'm talking about the 90s, but in general, fast forward to the present era, where now we're not just sitting here and we're going, oh well, fuck white people and white people are pieces of shit and all they're colonizers and they're blah blah blah. But it's like no, like one of the key factors that played into how all three of these scenarios kind of played out in real time was it was a racial bias. It was an implicit, unnamed, unacknowledged racial bias where these men and their unacknowledged whiteness was in fact playing an influential role in how they were able to get away with mischaracterizing the humanity of these other people and how they were able to engage in pedophilia in isolation from Western society and then still get away with it. Or, perhaps to some extent, child marriage, although he's respecting the customs of these people, that still opens up for bias about, well, just because they're offering you a child bride doesn't mean you should accept it because that's not your culture. And you can see how it opens up a bunch of philosophical conundrums. And so, on the basis of this, we are now examining whiteness with the context of colonialism in mind. How is it that colonialism has informed the manifestation of how whiteness functions in society today? And so that's where you get the anthropological origins anyway. How is whiteness operating as an unmarked norm in society that really is having real world influences, despite the fact that we can all acknowledge that race is not a biologically valid concept whatsoever? Okay? So the term whiteness then refers to the ways that white people, their customs, yes, they have customs, their culture, yes, they have a culture, believe it or not, and their beliefs are operating as a standard by which all other groups are compared. Long story short, for the sake of time, I've cut out some slides. If you were on campus in my classes, we would go into much more detail about this. If you want to know the short version of what I mean by operate as the standard, one of the things that I encourage you to look up is called hegemonic culture. Hegemonic. And then the rest should be Google will fill it out. That's what I'm talking about here, right? And so within the hegemonic culture of the West or of the Americas, you have whiteness centered as the norm, as the default, from which all others are viewed to be inferior or defective or abnormal or lesser valid in some kind of way. And so it creates an insular experience in which other people are racialized, other people are otherized, but whiteness is really just centered as the basis from which humanity resides, the basis from which human identity exists. And white people don't have race, other people have race, right? So this is what we mean when we refer to whiteness. Yes, it is an arbitrary term. Yes, to some extent, it is kind of over generalizing in a way, but we're there's more emphasis on social phenomena than there is on like skin color per se, if that makes sense. Okay. Now, there are lots of non-white scholars that have all kinds of perspectives on the topic of whiteness. The late author and poet Toni Morrison, for example, said, "In this country, American means white, and everybody else has to hyphenate." And one of the things that's interesting about this is, in a way, she's drawing attention to this concept that whiteness is centered as a norm, and that to be American, more or less, is to be white. Every time I'm in my classes, I always ask my students this question. I always ask, how many of you have been out of the country? How many of you if you are people of color, have you been out of the country? And what did it feel like for you when someone else referred to you as American? Usually, the most common sentiment is, yeah, it almost felt like they were calling me white. And it felt weird because even in my home country, the United States of America, I don't identify as American. I always put emphasis on my race first. And that's the way it goes. Is white people get to identify as white American, it would almost be like um, to call someone white American is like a redundancy, where like calling someone Native American somehow is not. But there's always an emphasis on skin color where whiteness doesn't have that. Okay. So what's contextualized here in the social phenomenon, or what I'm trying to reveal to you anyway, while trying to keep this around an hour, is that there is this weight that is essentially metaphorical weight that is lifted off of the shoulders of people who identify as one, in that they do not have to lean into racialized experiences. They don't have to think about them. They don't really have to be aware of them in the same ways that other non white people do. And it's made painfully clear in our language, in our culture, and in the ways that our society functions. And as you see, we'll kind of unfold this and unpack it a little bit. But hopefully, I'm being clear here. I can't really see any receptiveness. I'm not looking for receptiveness in faces if you're in the chat or anything like that, because it would be a little bit distracting for me. But in my class, usually I can naturally talk a little bit better when I'm interacting with people rather than just kind of talking to my computer screen. Um, but people who identify as white are inherently placed in a position by virtue of existing in a hegemonic culture. They didn't, the white people who exist today aren't the ones who created this. They didn't ask for this, but they are inherently placed in a position in which society organizes around them being in the center, right? And so in that way, whiteness is normalized where non-whiteness is then abnormalized. This gives us our I want to say our intellectual validity, the valid basis upon which we are then examining how whiteness functions in society, right? So this is where you get to whiteness studies, and there are a few key concepts. These are not the only concepts that motivate whiteness studies at all. But first of all, I want to be academically and scientifically consistent. Is that we are not treating whiteness as if it is some kind of anomaly, not at all. Being perfectly consistent with other forms of race science, not necessarily scientific racism, but examining race in a scientifically meaningful way, we are also viewing whiteness as being socially constructed too. That even though society somehow organizes whiteness at the center and everyone has to function around white identity and white norms and customs, we recognize that that too is a manifestation of artificial construction, right? That to be white, the concept is not biologically valid, just like it would be for any other racial identity, but that it is socially and politically valid. And so we are then looking at how society functions on that basis. The other, let's say, key concept about whiteness studies in this context is that we're viewing whiteness as normative, whiteness as literally being the standard from which dot dot dot. It operates as an invisible norm. So when you turn on the TV, for example, and you're shuffling through different TV shows. I always like to say, and I'm not ashamed of saying this at all because I'm anti-racist. I don't mind acknowledging race. Apple TV Plus is one of the whitest streaming platforms ever around. But if you go on Apple TV Plus, there aren't really people who are going, "Oh my God, it's so white. Like, where's the diversity?" They have the Jason Momoa show, they have like a Mahershala Ali film, but really, at the core of like Apple TV Plus, no matter what you turn on, it is very white dominated. I'm in a few episodes of a show called Platonic with Seth Rogen. You might catch me in the background or something like that. Um, but it's like that. It's like it's just I don't know. It's weird, right? We're observing how whiteness functions as some kind of unnamed and implicit norm, and then from that basis, then how is it? What creates the experiential differences between white people and non-white others that we're then calling privilege, right? Because lots of people who are kind of, let's say, racially illiterate think of white privilege as like being like, oh, well, I'm white, and every time I walk outside, people are rolling out the red carpet for me and they kiss the ground I walk on, and everyone wants to like give me massages and things like that. When in reality, white privilege is simply trying to describe how the experience that comes with not having your race as a factor that is used against you in your pursuit of the goals that you have in life, right? And so, on that basis, centered in this hegemonic norm, is whiteness then receives a unique set of benefits and advantages that other non white people, I'm talking on large scale, not necessarily individual difference, because there's always exceptions to the rule, but by and large, whiteness is allocated with a body of social privileges that non white others do not receive. And so here is where I will repeat my preface by saying, I am not a white person. I can't speak for white people. I'm not trying to speak for white people. But in these next two slides, I'm basically condensing down many of the different aspects of whiteness studies that many different whiteness scholars probe on the basis of this academic examination, right? And so this is what I would loosely describe as the white experience in America. Okay. We're talking about this in the American context, not necessarily elsewhere. Is that first, interestingly, there are many white people, not all white people, because whiteness is not monolithic. There are many white people that are very uncomfortable acknowledging race, drawing attention to race, talking about their own race. Um, be, Part of the reason for that discomfort is because they were taught to be uncomfortable, that it is to be taboo. It's a bad thing, and I'll expand on this in a moment. It's a bad thing to acknowledge race, to see a difference in somebody's color, to put name to that color, to treat people different on the basis of that color. They have been taught that that is a bad thing, and so have learned and have been conditioned over time in the modern era to find it uncomfortable to talk about race. At the beginning of my lecture, like at the start of the semester, in when I teach this class, I always tell my students, look, this is the race and racism class. We're here to talk about race. We're talking about all of the things that are uncomfortable. We're talking about all of the things that you've probably been taught, especially the white people in here, have been taught not to talk about. And so if it's not my intention to make you uncomfortable or to unsettle you in some kind of way, but if you feel discomfort, that's the moment for you to reflect. There's something there that is giving you that discomfort that you need to figure out where that discomfort is coming from, right? And it's an opportunity for you to learn. And if you're not comfortable with it, please don't take it out on me. But then the best thing I could encourage you to do is this is probably not the class for you because I need you to lean in to talking about these things and engaging with these things. But if you're very touch and go, you only dip your toe in, you're trying to cut around the corners and scrape the surface or something like that, like scrape the barrel, it's going to be very difficult for you to succeed in the class. And so this is where generally I've never singled out anybody, but it's usually white people that drop. Right. So that's a sign of the reinforcement of that discomfort. Another aspect is that white people are then socialized to see race as something that other people have, that they don't necessarily have race. They all view themselves as like individuals. They see themselves as like just a person. They're just an ordinary person. Racism is something that's like conscious hate. Other people have it. And on that basis, then it is wrong to like put emphasis on other people's race. In essence, it almost like epistemologically otherizes non-white people in an interesting way. But then, in addition to that, on that basis, they're also socialized to see racism as like conscious dislike. It is intentional hate. It's a behavioral anomaly. It's not something that is normative in society. It's not something that is cultural. If you ever see racism or talk about racism or acknowledge racism in some kind of way, your proximity to racism makes you a bad person. And so, in order to not be a bad person, you cannot talk about race or you're the racist. You cannot acknowledge race. It's just better to just kind of pretend like those things exist. And if we don't talk about race, if we don't talk about racism, then the racism will just go away. Essentially, to everyone who is not white, it's the idea of like burying your head in the sand. But do place yourself in the shoes of a white person. If you are placed at the center of a hegemonic culture and you are taught that you don't have you're taught not to see your own racial experience. You're taught not to acknowledge it. You can then see why it would be kind of natural to then go, well, why is everybody else talking about this? Like, this isn't something that you should be talking. If I'm not allowed to talk about it, why are you talking about it? And I've been told that if we acknowledge that race is a bad thing, that makes you a bad person. So when you put so much emphasis on your race, Black Lives Matter, when you put so much emphasis on your race, civil rights movement, when Colin Kaepernick is kneeling on the football field, well, he's the asshole. He's the bad guy. Now you can understand the mentality behind why people would then burn his jerseys, why he gets banned from the NFL, he gets blacklisted. It becomes a whole conundrum. That's where that's coming from. It's white people were taught, white people, first of all, were taught that they are in control of what happens in the society around them. But then more importantly, they're not supposed to acknowledge race and the racial reality that they have control of what's going on in society around them. And so if you do so, you're a bad person. And then by virtue of being a bad person, if other people acknowledge race, then they're the bad person. So now you have a bunch of black people that are putting so much emphasis on their race. Why can't they shut up? It's not about skin color, blah, blah, blah. You can see where this mentality then comes from. Okay. And so naturally, I wouldn't even say this is every white person. I would say just every human being sees themselves as a good person. And so on that basis, it's kind of innate that you're the hero of your own story. There, at least to my knowledge, anyway, even the people who are unfortunately suffering, I don't know of very many people who see themselves as the villain of their own story, right? And so, because in the context of whiteness, they see themselves as a good person, they don't necessarily see themselves as being connected to race and being connected to racism. Because to be connected, to be proximate to racism, to have race, then cognitively, I don't know, psychologically, maybe that's the word I'm looking for, that makes you a bad person. And so, because they are a good person, that means there is an intentional and active effort to distance themselves away from the topic of race and racism as far as possible, as much as possible, right? And so, this is where it's interesting because this is the racialized experience of white people in America while they are trying to run away from it. So, what happens then is you end up with this phenomenon that is an academic term. It's not just an emotional sentiment. Like I said, we're not trying to mischaracterize white people in any way, but this is where you get the concept of white fragility. That's where the fragility is coming from. It's from this position of inherently seeing yourself and positioning yourself as a good person. And because you have been socialized to see racism, any discussion of racism, being in proximity to racism as a bad thing, it means that you will do whatever you can possible to distance yourself from it, including finding it uncomfortable to be in discussions or involved in discussions about race. You don't want to draw attention to your race or your skin color, while also then being keenly aware of the privileges that society gives you on the basis of your skin color too. It's like this. It's a state of cognitive dissonance. For those of you who are at least academically literate to some extent, I'm sure you're aware of W.E.B. Du Bois talking about the veil. The veil, for those of you who don't know, is a cognitive position, a psychological position in which Black people are forced to see themselves through their own humanity and through their own subjective lens, while also being keenly aware of how the rest of America views them on the basis of their race. Believe it or not, white people are experiencing a symptom or something like that, but on the other side of the coin. It's a unique cognitive dissonance position. In essence, a culture of racism can be psychologically deleterious and harmful to everyone who's involved in it. And this is one of those theoretical concepts I could go on and on about. I won't go on and on about it. You can ask me about it, I can expand. But let's get back to the point. The point is, this is where white fragility comes from. Um, so the concept of anti-racism, it sounds like flamboyant in a way. It's like confrontational. It's like, oh, there's racism out there and it's bad and we're going to confront it wherever it is. While you have white people that are like trying to intentionally, they're like hyper vigilant of trying to be away from it. And somehow, if the spotlight ends up right on their heads, right on top of them, it can be triggering. That's going to trigger the fragility. That's going to trigger the defensive responses. It's going to trigger the thing where they're going to try to get us far away from it. So it doesn't matter if it's racism. Racism some white people will consciously embrace, but it doesn't matter if it's anti-racism. The point is, you get as far away from this cluster of nebulous concepts we call racism as far as possible, doing whatever you can. Maybe that's raising your voice, maybe that's crying, maybe that's distancing yourself, maybe that's shifting the blame so that the people who are talking about race, even how to figure out the problem of racism, they're the racists. And you're not racist because you don't talk about race. You're not close to it. You're not affiliated with it. You're not connected to it. It's that kind of thing, right? So this creates a unique phenomenon in which there are lots of white people that then do not like talking about race or racism. And so doing so triggers defensiveness and discomfort. I can't tell you how many times I may have posted a video that somebody who was, oh, they sent me a message on Instagram saying, oh, I'm a fan and I love your work and blah, blah, blah. But then I start talking about whiteness. And then they're like, hey, well, why did you blah, blah, blah? I don't like that you said da, da, da. It triggers the defensiveness because the moment I'm talking about racism, they're on board with, yeah, it's bad. But now I'm talking about white people. And then they're going, hey, I feel attacked. We shouldn't, and I'm not attacking anybody. Does it sound like I'm attacking anybody? Not really, right? Um, and so this is what happens then when we try to have discussions about race and about racism in political society. In reality, it's like it's very difficult. This is why it's so difficult to get white people, including those on the extreme end of the spectrum, like Charlie Kirk, for example, to truly understand what is actually even being advocated for or articulated. There's no desire to understand or empathize with those things because it inherently positions them as a bad person. If they have to connect with discussions about racism in any context, whether that's history or otherwise, then we have to start talking about the privileges that they have that they don't want to talk about. Then we have to start talking about the power that they know that they have that they don't really want drawn attention to because drawing attention to that power might mean that they lose it, right? You can start seeing how this connects to very modern social responses and reactions in the age of racial advocacy once again, right? Um, the other part of what would trigger white fragility is because white people see themselves as individuals, they don't like being generalized. And I mean that in the same way that they would generalize Black people or Asian people or any other racial group, any group that has race, because they are in a psychological or cognitive position in which they do not have race. They should not be generalized, right? They should only be seen as people. So when you start talking about the concept of whiteness, right? All the time. One of the things, if you go to my Instagram page and you find a reel where I make mention of like white rage or something like that, there will always be a comment about white rage. Well, why don't we talk about black rage? Well, oh, are you going to talk about black fragility next? It's a thing where like the moment we get to talking about what is actually a scientific phenomenon, given the context of hegemonic culture here, suddenly white people have a problem with being generalized. And so this is the same way that you can find a video of Charlie Kirk going, oh, talking about white privilege is racist, but then he'll go, how many black people are killing, maiming, murdering, crime, blah, blah, blah. You see how it works, right? So fragility is not just like a subconscious response. It's literally also a weapon. It's something that lots of white people are consciously aware of. And they know that if they leverage their fragility to try to derail productive conversations or areas where other people might be able to learn about racism, you can actually undermine the loss of power. You can undermine the loss of privilege. And so those people who are firmly invested in holding on to that privilege and holding on to that power will intentionally leverage their fragility to try to hinder those conversations. And that's where you get to somebody like Charlie Kirk. This is where I would say this is why you never talk to Charlie Kirk. For those of you who may or may not have seen, I recently posted a video about how Charlie Kirk is a malicious contrarian, right? Part of the nature of being a malicious contrarian on the racial front looks exactly like what Charlie Kirk is doing. And no point that you make that's valid or sound or good is going to motivate him to somehow see the light. That's never going to happen. He knows what's up. He's aware of what's up. And he's doing what he can to undermine it because if he doesn't, it means the loss of the consolidation of white power and white privilege. I would go so far as to characterize this as the white fragility prayer. This is a psychosocial model that I developed last year. Well, not last year, over the last like 5 years. I gave talks on this like years ago. Um, but it's something that I've been exploring in my free time in reading whiteness studies literature, but then also just trying to characterize what can sometimes feel like a clusterfuck of like looking at the same responses from white people who find themselves in proximity to accusations of racism, but then like they give different responses, but they're sometimes the same. And so what I have found is that after enough repetition and enough study, I've developed a psychosocial model that can predict the range of responses that you would expect to find from a fragile white person who somehow finds themselves in proximity to racism. For those of you who have access to the slides on Patreon, you're welcome to click the links here. These are just example videos of like a white person who's clearly demonstrating what is racially provocative and problematic behavior, and then somehow comes out with an apology when everybody sees it, and then they go, "I'm not a racist" in some kind of way, right? So the psychosocial framework of the white fragility prayer is essentially the narcissist prayer. It's racism exists, but not here. And if it's here, it's not me. And if it's me, I didn't mean it. And if I meant it, it's not racist or I'm not racist. That's just how it is. There's a little bit more to this prayer too. But in general, that's what condenses it down to now whenever you see the range of responses for a person who's clearly demonstrating textbook quote unquote racist behavior, you can pretty much read this word for word, and no matter where you pinpoint them, they'll always end up in a position of it's not racist. They're not racist. They have nothing to do with racism. The racism is always out there somewhere. It's just out of reach. We can never get a hold of it. We can never fix it. And we're totally against racism, but it's just never where we are. And then they continue to then reproduce the same racially provocative and problematic behaviors, knowing what they're doing. It's kind of conscious lean in to those things, right? So it makes it so that like racism never has a proximal location. This is why it is a psychosocial model, because in the mind of a white person, get as far away from racism as possible, even if you're the one perpetuating it, right? So this framework then allows a person, it's kind of like an algorithm. It allows them to distance themselves from the racism, no matter how close it might actually be, to the point that it becomes like cognitive dissonance. And so then this also means then that to resolve those problems, to repair those problems, you can never remedy those issues. So the bad racism, it's always out there somewhere. It's always someone else's problem, but it's like this highly conceptual and intangible problem. It's not me. It's not us. It's nowhere near us. We have nothing to do with it. Not only do you see this model in function at the individual level, you also see this model in function at the organizational level too. And by organizational level, I mean like corporate entities, public facing bodies, those groups that are led by white majority executive leadership. And so then in the politics of their business, display many of the characteristics, responses, the politics firmly embedded in whiteness and therefore white fragility. in essence, we might characterize right fragility as like your ability to duck and dodge accountability, no matter what. Minimize the racism, deny the racism, reject it, invalidate it, shift the goalpost, ignore it, rationalize it, figure out whatever you can do so that the racism is just you can never pinpoint it, we can never fix it, we can never resolve it. And then we end up in this cycle where you're going around in circles with white people who perpetuate demonstrably clear textbook racist behaviors, embody racist beliefs and animosity, and yet somehow 200 years after slavery, it's not 200 years after slavery, I'm being facetious, but decades, long time passes after slavery, long time passes after the abolishment of Jim Crow, and yet you still have white people that somehow embody these values and do nothing to fix or resolve them, while outwardly proclaiming that they are against the very racism that they intentionally perpetuate. And so then you get to the topic of white rage or white anger, and there are many examples of this. Jesus, because I'm so not going back and forth. You'll have to give me about 5 extra minutes or so. I'll try to do my best to wrap up for the Q&A. But you have this concept of white rage. Again, this is not an emotional term. It's not one that we're trying to use to just mischaracterize white people. This is an actual academic term to describe a phenomenon rooted in history of the white majority engaging in a kind of backlash whenever there is any sort of incremental step towards equality in America. And so I have some historical examples that I'll reference in just a moment. But one of the most notable examples of this was literally the insurrection, right? Of where you have somehow America is like par for the course in society until Barack Obama becomes elected. Then politics become toxic, they become volatile, they become polarizing. And now it's not about bipartisanship, unless it's passing a spending bill or something like that. Now it's just about their side versus our side. It's interesting because in the modern era, the political discourse is always liberals versus conservatives. And in yesteryear, I remember in like the early 2000s, maybe even the 90s, yes, I was young, but yes, I was also politically conscious too. A lot of people found themselves kind of in the middle. Yes, they agree with the conservatives on some issues. Yes, they agree with the progressives on the other issues, and they just kind of find themselves as like sometimes single issue voters, key swing voters, those kinds of things. Now in society, it's oh the liberals and oh they're doing this and oh the conservatives and blah blah blah, and it's so polarizing that it creates a unique phenomenon of division in American society that hasn't been seen, I want to say, since the debate over slavery. It's very interesting. Mind you, the debates over slavery lasted for about 100 years and led up to the Civil War. And now on my Instagram algorithm, I am looking at political divides that are night and day and people talking about Civil War, right? So something to think about, right? But in the context of this discussion, white rage, we are talking about a unique phenomenon. It's not like white people sit there and go, oh, okay, how are we going to do our white rage this time? It's just more like they have a natural inclination to kind of protect what they feel like is theirs by any means necessary, which means usually means going on the offensive. Um, so whenever you get incremental steps towards racial equality in some way, we've had 40 some odd presidents but before Barack Obama, was it 39? I don't know the number. I'm not a political scientist. I'm politically savvy, obviously, but I'm kind of talking to my computer screen right now, so you'll have to give me a little bit of grace on the facts on this. Um, but you have one non-white president, and now suddenly white people are like leaning into fascism, and they're ready to get rid of democracy. They're ready to lean into authoritarianism and autocracy. They want to get rid of this altogether because liberal this and liberal that and blah blah blah. Right? It's always a culture war for this group of people. Right? And there are examples of this in history, not just from the insurrection, but going all the way back to the Reconstruction era. This is the period in time where slavery was just eradicated, Okay, because Abraham Lincoln did the quote unquote unthinkable that was debated for 100 years. He'd finally done it. And then, literally 2 weeks after, I think it was after, no, 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 no. Excuse me on my facts. Abraham Lincoln was entertaining the idea that the black people who had fought on behalf of the Union, and many of them were risking their lives, they should have the right to vote in American democracy. And he was entertaining this. He had published a letter. You can find this letter on the internet if you look it up. He published a letter basically saying that he was considering giving black veterans the right to vote because they had earned it on the basis of risking their lives to preserve American values and ideals. And then I think it was 3 days or so after he published this letter, John Wilkes Booth assassinated him, right? That's an example of white rage. But then not only that, where black people, the Republican Party, which was then progressive, they were not conservative, was leaning into giving black people the right to vote. Um, you had a backlash where now these dilapidated Confederates are now finding themselves in positions where their former slaves are running for political office and winning, and they're trying to pass laws to make themselves equal. So these Confederates then form what's called the KKK, and then they start assassinating these black politicians. They assassinate the white Republicans that were helping them. They assassinate people to the point that for quite a while, they had essentially insurrected the United States. And they held the presidency, they held House, they held Senate for quite a few terms, and through the act of reinforced violence, right? That's an example of white rage or white anger. There's many examples other than that one. Then you have the backlash to the desegregation of schools. Is a bunch of white people are pissed off and angry. Oh, I have 10 more minutes. I'm looking at my timer here. Okay, great. You have a bunch of white people that are pissed off and angry that the Supreme Court would move to desegregate schools. Um, and the NAACP was basically launching a series of court cases to challenge certain rulings in certain areas regarding racial segregation, and they were trying to win the Supreme Court over on the basis of constitutionality. And because the Supreme Court, despite being culturally conservative and kind of implicitly white supremacist because of that, um, despite the Supreme Court being kind of intellectually biased in this way, because they truly cared about American values and ideals and protecting and defending and maintaining the consistency of the Constitution, they were in fact moved towards desegregation just on the logic of what the Constitution affords all Americans. And so this then angers a bunch of white people, angry white people who are then lashing out. They're spitting on these kids. They're invading communities, bombing churches, these kinds of things, engaging in racial terror, right? One of the readings that we cover in my class, we talk about racial stereotypes and how the racial stereotypes that we're all familiar with, black people being thugs and gangsters and criminals, Mexican people being illegal immigrants, Asian people being good at math, those kinds of things. It is all calibrated from a white perspective. And then I started encouraging my students to think about what racial stereotypes exist when we look at other racial groups from a non-white lens. So, because it's an African American studies class, I always encourage them to think about, like, what are white stereotypes from the perspective of Black people? Where, like, for example, in modern American political discourse, we often look at Middle Easterners and Arab identifying people or people who belong to the Islamic faith as like terrorists, right? And they oppress women and things like that. But what's interesting is when you shift the perspective from a white centered view to a black centered view, the Arabs actually aren't the terrorists, the white people are. White people then have the stereotype of terrorists, and not like jihadi terrorists, like blow yourself up, towel head kind of terrorists, but racial terrorists. The terrorists that will bomb your churches, lynch your children, and spit on your children just for trying to go to school, right? Or backlash in some kind of way. It's interesting when you start to talk about racial stereotypes as being a function of subjectivity, and true subjectivity then means that when we shift the lens, the racial stereotypes change. Doesn't necessarily make them right. It doesn't make them correct because obviously not all white people are terrorists. I'm always going to tell you, race is not monolithic. So whiteness is not monolithic. And yet there is an extensive pattern of history, not just a single event that we call 9/11, but like literally hundreds of years of racial terror that would then at least substantiate why, from a black centered view, they would then view white people as the terrorists and not the Muslims. Does that make sense? It's very interesting. Anyway, I digress. Let's get back on topic. Even in the modern era, where you have the post-Obama era, there for a while, yes, you still had the KKK. I suppose in the South here and there, you still had lynchings. But it's another thing entirely when in the post Obama era, you then get the emergence of a number of white people that are then carrying tiki torches. They're marching in the streets. They're chanting, "You will not replace us, blood and soil, get out of our country, immigration, blah, blah, blah." They're like chanting these things. And what launched the protest in Charlottesville was because they were removing a Confederate statue. If you recall, like I would say the angry white people that you see on the screen here, if you think about this, they claim to be patriots. They claim to care about the interest of the country. They claim, excuse me, to embody American principles and values, right? And in claiming that, what's interesting is they're ready to get rid of the Constitution. They're ready to change constitutional law. They're ready to lean into authoritarianism and fascism, right? Abandon American principles altogether, the founding principles of the nation. Isn't that interesting? This is a function of what I would describe as being white rage, right? Angry because as society moves towards a more fair, just, and equal America, which ultimately implicitly means that whiteness has less influence, less relevance, less control over society, less power over society, less social currency or social capital, if you will. It often means that while we're not talking about the displacement of whiteness, we are talking about decentering whiteness. And on the basis of decentering whiteness, white people who are firmly invested in the status quo, they call themselves conservative, they feel under attack. And I'm not saying that they're right. I'm not saying you have to agree with them, but hopefully it is very clear to you why they feel under attack. The reason why they feel under attack is because the norm has been for so long that social capital belongs to whiteness. Merit belongs to whiteness, right? Power and control and privilege is an inherent right endowed to whiteness. And so a more fair, just, and equal America means the loss of that privilege, the loss of that social capital. So then fuck America. Fuck democracy, fuck the Constitution, fuck all of that. That's where you start to see that from. So this is where you get the emergence of people like Charlie Kirk, who, while he doesn't directly embody white rage or anger, he is in a way their voice. I just saw a video. I've been thinking about a video response to this Jordan Klepper reel. There's a Jordan Klepper reel making its way through Instagram that I saw where he's interviewing college students who are fans of Charlie Kirk. Unsurprisingly, most are white and male, and they're telling Jordan Klepper that Charlie Kirk is their voice. He's their voice of reason. He's the guy who puts into words the things that they cannot say, but it's the things that they feel, and they believe that he's right, right? And so then, on that basis, right, like I said, Charlie Kirk is not a symptom or the embodiment of white rage or anger, but he is a kind of a recruitment officer in a way. He's the guy who is trying to recruit other vulnerable white people into this position of feeling like they're at a loss, feeling like they're under siege, feeling like they're under attack. And what he's doing is he's appealing to their traditional values, right? I would say this is a buzzword of conservatism, is that the traditional values often means the traditional values of whiteness being at the center, whiteness having political and economic control, whiteness being the norm. No, they don't want to see a black Ariel. No, they don't care about the Black Panther on the thing. No, they don't care about a black stormtrooper. I'm making media references, but the logic applies elsewhere too. And so then Charlie Kirk, he's not just going to these college students to try to groom them. I have 3 slides left, so please give me a few more minutes. He's not going to these college students to like groom them. I know South Park likes to do this thing where he's like a master debater, and he gets off to talking to these young college students, and if he could he would sleep with them and blah blah blah. For Charlie Kirk and his entire political movement, it really is more like they are trying to present white supremacy as being reasonable, as being rational, that even though it may sound fringe or provocative or something like that, they are trying to convince white people not to lean into a more fair and just America, but actually the exact opposite. That's why they're called turning point. It's in the name. The name is, yeah, okay, college students, you're going this way. Can we redirect you right the fuck back this way? And so I would ask you, once you're aware of Charlie Kirk, especially in my videos, but I would encourage you to look at Charlie Kirk in this way. If you had to look at the angry people that were spitting on the children that wanted to go to a desegregated school, the people that are saying race mixing is communism and blah blah blah, if you were to think about the kinds of things that they would say, these pictures are incriminating. They're angry, they're hostile, they're spitting. So if they want to save their face, they have to be a little bit more moderate. And in being a little bit more moderate, they still view themselves to be patriotic to American ideals and values. So how would you expect for them to try to win other people over to their side that are appealing to the politics of Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and Kwame Ture? Well, you're going to get somebody like Charlie Kirk. And so, because white supremacy is not logical, it is not rational, it is not reasonable, the best effort you can possibly put forward is it's going to look like frequent gaslighting. It's going to look like frequent lying. It's going to look like not letting people have a voice in the things that they say that might contradict the values of white supremacy. It's going to look like a person who is always critical of anti-white racism, always and forever. It is predictable. They are firmly against racism, especially the anti-white kind. However, they are never critical of all the other kinds of racism. In fact, they're xenophobic. In fact, they're anti-diversity. Do you see how that works? Right? They're sexist. They're homophobic. They're transphobic. They're Islamophobic in every way possible that you would expect for, like, if this angry white woman that's shouting behind this black girl, if she had to save face and go, yeah, okay, I'm sorry. Please forgive me for looking that way. I just, okay, here are my values. You end up with a person like Charlie Kirk, who is only ever going to go to those college students because they white supremacy is under siege by virtue of American collegiate institutions, where they get to hang around people that don't look like them. They get to spend time with people that don't look like them. They're not being racially isolated anymore like they were in upstate Texas or upstate New York or upstate somewhere else. Okay, so now this black person or this brown person is your best friend because they were your college roommate and they're not as bad as your parents made them out to be. Oh, that Spanish speaking person is your boyfriend now or your girlfriend now, or they became your husband and your wife. And now you're starting to see the evil that comes from the culture of American conservatism, where now you're directly learning about white supremacy with a person like me, and then you got to go back home to the people who embody all of these values and go, holy shit, Yeah, that's right. My parents are white supremacists. And then on the other end, your parents are also pissed off because now you're a quote unquote liberal because you can see the white supremacy for how it actually is. This is why it's called Turning Point. This is why he's going to college students. They say, oh, he's appealing to voters. Well, I'm a voter. Appeal to me. You can't. There's a reason for that. So it's not that Charlie Kirk is a groomer. It's that if you want white supremacy to stay relevant, you literally have to target younger generations. Otherwise, white supremacy will find itself in extinction. And so while Charlie Kirk is the mouthpiece on this end, Donald Trump is and Elon Musk and all of these other people, they're the aggressive, politically empowered people on the other end of the spectrum. So white rage and anger is not always necessarily going to look like hostility, vitriol. It's going to look like institutional responses, political responses, right? Legislative measures to cement and preserve a white control, white dominated control. If you drive through any of these counties, excuse me, that Texas has proposed to gerrymander, drive through them. When I moved from New York all the way to LA, I drove and I drove in 2 days and I didn't stop because I knew I was in danger. Because when you're driving in these areas, these rural areas, and there's billboards, it's okay to be white, white pride, and then pay attention, right? Now they're taking legislative action to water down people who don't vote conservative, punitive policies that seek to maintain racial hierarchy, and it is under the guise of law and order and justice and tradition. Social backlash to political influences like political movements like Black Lives Matter, for example, positioning them as somehow being dangerous. All of these are manifestations of white rage and anger. Two more slides and then we'll open up for questions. I'm sorry I'm going a little bit over time. Okay. So, white rage. How do I know that conservatism is white rage? You've seen the reel where I say, "Oh, look at these two political parties, and guess which one is which." And inevitably, you know that the white one is conservative, and the one that's more diverse are the progressives. And the reason why you know that is because there is a fundamental part of you that does, in fact, know that the politics of conservatism really is white supremacy, and it always has been. That's why the even if you don't identify as a KKK Klansman, a hood wearing Klansman, and you don't relate to the political ideology of David Duke supports Donald Trump just as much as the other conservatives who don't relate to the KKK do, because it is in fact white supremacy politics. If conservatism were not white supremacy politics, you would not see a racial monolith represented in our congressional body. You would not see a person like Charlie Kirk constantly assassinating non-white peoples, and particularly black people, because black is a conceptual and philosophical opposite to white. You wouldn't see it. It wouldn't be necessary, right? And so they present these things as we're trying to preserve our cultural values. We're trying to preserve justice and order by electing a felon and a rapist and a pedophile and evoking the politics of racism by saying it's your tradition. Yes, it is traditional. They're not lying when they say it's traditional. That's not a lie. There's no gaslighting there. American cultural values from the start of this country has always been firmly rooted in white supremacy. And so over time, incrementally, whiteness and white supremacy has lost that step. And so they need to take more radical action. And so that radical action looks like white rage and anger in all of its manifestations. It can be violent, like the insurrection. It can be political, like the gerrymandering going on in Texas. It can also be rhetorical, like we see with the platform of Turning Point USA and specifically Charlie Kirk. So now, on this basis, last slide here before we open up for questions. I want you, I want you to stop thinking about white supremacy as just being the KKK. Oh, if a person says that white people are superior, they throw up the Hail Hitler salute, they use the word nigger, that they're a white supremacist. Think beyond that because white supremacy is making moves beyond the sort of straw man that you've come to know when it comes to quote unquote racism. See white supremacy as a comprehensive system of political power, physical power, social power, and privilege that will always place white people at the top of society. And it will leverage other non white people if it helps them to get there faster, if it helps them to maintain control. Now you've got whites only townships that are starting to form. This isn't a coincidence. This isn't an accident. Okay. Now, I'm not encouraging you when I say these things to put on a tinfoil hat and start policing people because they might agree with conservatives on one or two things. Okay. Instead, what I'm asking you to do is to understand that there are power grabs, and it is always by a collective body of white people who do not want to be generalized, who will do whatever they can to distance themselves from the accusation of racism while also playing the game of racism. Okay. So when we talk about white supremacy here, we're not just talking about the KKK. We're talking about everybody, including the KKK, but far beyond it. Donald Trump, Elon Musk, Charlie Kirk, Alexander, what is his name? Xavier DeRusso, Brandon Tatum. Look at white supremacy for all of its operative nuances. Okay. And no, I'm not just trying to single out these people and go, oh, you're a white supremacist, get them. It's just more like you need to expand your awareness so that you can see just how aggressive everyone really is for the sake of white supremacy. And when you sit there with DEI politics and progressivism and you want to go, oh, we're going to sing hands and multiculturalism and sing kumbaya and blah, 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 they're still engaging in political power grabs. And then eventually, when the political pendulum swings the other way, no one's really as aggressive about cultivating actual equality and fairness and justice in American society as they are about moving us further and further away from it. Okay. And they're doing whatever they can, wherever they can, to make sure that white supremacy stays relevant in American society. And it is embodied by an entire political spectrum called conservatism, going all the way back to the Reconstruction era. Okay. That's the end of lecture. We're going to end right there. And I've stopped screen sharing. I am going to open up for chat. Oh my God, there's lots of people here. Awesome. I love it. Uh, please, you can, please do not unmute yourself and don't start a video unless you raise your hand. I really don't want like a bunch of people jumping in all at once um, to, uh, to talk at the same time if we can get in an orderly fashion. But I would love to hear from others who are here if you want to ask questions. I'm even paying attention to the live feed on Instagram very passively, but I will be giving preference to the people who are in the Zoom chat here. If anyone would like to ask a question related to the topic that we talked about here, or maybe even something else, I invite you to do so. You should be able to start your video. You should be able to unmute yourself if you would like to. While we're waiting, yes, Monica, please feel free to ask your question. And if you have any questions in the IG live stream, please ask them as well, and I'll try to get to them as I can. Monica,
Hello. I contacted you earlier in the week, so I thought this would be a good time to bring up that question that I had kind of posed to you that we agreed we'd wait till this because it's actually very, very relevant, and I'm glad that we waited. It was on like interest convergence and Bell's theory in terms of like how white people won't want to create a better world effectively for people of color unless it falls within their own interests and not out of any sort of like genuine altruism. And
Yeah.
it's like, how do you overcome that? Because especially, the likes of Trump and Charlie Kirk and all of that, it feels like their interests are never going to align.
Yeah. And to be honest with you, in a thorough review of American history, it's also very clear that like it always felt that way, even from the time of slavery. Like, how can we get these white people to end slavery when they benefit from it? It's like going against their own interest. I'll tell you, there are two things about this that I have come to learn. This is my own conceptual understanding. If I had another CRT scholar in here to chime in, I would absolutely encourage them to do so. Interest convergence is a concept, as Monica described, where social justice movements or the social justice or moving towards social justice doesn't happen until whiteness gets a benefit. Okay. Um, it creates a predictive circumstance in which if you can find a way to force the outcome, you can do so. I'll give you the example of the Montgomery bus boycott. Do you know what this was? Okay. The Montgomery bus boycott was Emmett Till was just recently lynched, and uh, Rosa Parks was asked to get up from her seat on a bus, to which she said no. So what ended up happening was because black people had a financial stake in the Montgomery busing system, they chose to boycott the busing system, which essentially meant financial loss of the busing system, and they started creating their own taxi services to get people from where they needed to go. And they did this for days, if not weeks. No, it wasn't like a month or something like that. Essentially, over a period of time, the Montgomery busing system had lost so much money that they were forced to accommodate the black people that were giving them all of that money. In essence, what happened here was that black people, even unconsciously, were leveraging interest convergence in their favor. They are forcing an outcome because of the political power that they have. It was over a year. Thank you, Linda. Um, it was over a year, but they forced an outcome in which the buses in Montgomery, Alabama, were then desegregated. Now, in a slightly contextually different context, where we're talking about racial equality, we're talking about DEI, we have to explore those avenues. I would say that interest leaning into the concept of interest convergence will help us to identify what the answer is. But I think it's going to look something like an amalgam of different forms. It's going to look like political decisiveness. It's going to look like rhetorical campaigns like the one that Charlie Kirk is engaged in and all of the people affiliated with Turning Point USA. It's going to look like securing presidential power. It's going to look like electing people in our Congress that are intentionally moving in this direction, right? Because right now, white supremacy is on its last leg. It's like fighting for survival. And I would say that the signs that we're seeing in this racially flamboyant and hostile political climate is our sign that we're moving in the right direction, right? It's like a video game. You get more enemies, the enemies get harder the closer and closer you get to the end, right? So the same thing applies here. Is you're seeing Charlie Kirk, Donald Trump, all of these people are they're desperate. And so because they're desperate, we really just need to find that one avenue. And I would say in general, what it's going to look like is it's going to start looking like intentionally moving comprehensively towards that direction. Now, how do you motivate white people? I don't know the answer. I know part of the answer is political decisiveness. I know it's rhetorical campaigns. It's not propaganda. It's just identifying people who live in racial isolation, and then I don't know what is an angle that appeals to them that would allow them to see the humanity of people who do not look like them. Usually, that's going to college. But beyond that, I don't know. I can tell you that's why Charlie Kirk is so gung ho about going after college students, is because colleges are the most effective. Everybody sends their children to college. Doesn't matter if it's in the state of Alabama, doesn't matter if it's in the state of New York or California. people are sending their children to college. So they're coming from these conservative environments, and then they're sending their children who may identify as conservative to college, where they then get to college. And maybe for the first year and a half or so, they identify as conservative. They start getting exposed to people like me. They start getting exposed to people, other students who don't look like them. They start realizing what's up, how they were lied to, what the problem was. And then from there, it starts to kind of falter. So this is why I think colleges is the answer, but I really don't have an answer. I think it's a very interesting question. And I know that on my end, in my classes, every semester, I have multiple students. At one point, I even had the entire class come up to me at the end of the semester and shake my hand for what was the best class they ever took. And I had several white people saying, "You changed my mind." I didn't have the goal to change their mind. All I did was give them some scientific literature, tell them a little bit about history, give them a little bit of logical reasoning around it. I'm not trying to debate anybody. I'm not trying to own anybody. I'm not even trying to win anyone over. And somehow they did the math for themselves, and now they're going home to their parents, and they're not conservative anymore. So I don't know. I think it's me. I think it's college. I think it's politics. I think it's an amalgam of different things that are leveraging interest convergence. And when I start teaching my students that, like, no, white people are harmed by this racial animosity too. You're not protected by it simply because it gives you advantages in the short term. Here are the long term disadvantages. And as we go through the courts, you'll start seeing that too. I spell it out, even in this abridged version. Like in the weeks to come, you'll start seeing how like white supremacy even harms white people. And then it's like, well, why are we invested? You're only invested in it because you were told it was a traditional hallmark. It was your values, and that's just what you're supposed to protect. And then the reality is like, no, you can kind of progressively turn the direction and move towards a more fair, just, and equal America. And it doesn't mean that you're at a loss. It just means that everyone else gets an equal playing field, gets an equal chance, equal opportunity, and is welcome or invited into the neighborhood. And it seems to be effective. But beyond that, it's a difficult concept. I was trying, um, before I open up, because I don't want to take too much time. I'm so sorry. I can ramble. Um, Professor Cheryl Grills, she recently retired from LMU, but she was a part of the California Reparations Task Force that was appointed by Gavin Newsom. And I got to make a little bit, anyway, of a contribution to the work that they were doing. And I was trying to encourage them to think about how they might leverage the concept of interest convergence in order to garner support for California reparations on behalf of slavery. I don't know how far they took it. I pivoted in another direction, but it's something that we really need to think about. Is now that we're to a point where we can start examining race and racism and race politics through a scientifically meaningful framework, and now we've got predictive power. We need to start leveraging that, and I think it just needs further exploration. Thank you, Monica. Yes, I see iPhone number two. Feel free to uh, unmute your phone. You don't have to show your face if you don't want to, but yeah, welcome. Hi.
Oh, hi. I'm actually from the Instagram stream, but I moved over to the Zoom. Um, and my question
Mhm,
is, how do contextually, my best friend of 6 years, I just ended that relationship. He's a
mhm,
straight white man, and um, I finally asked him who he voted for, and he said Donald Trump.
mhm,
So ha-
mhm,
after the 6 years of telling him my experiences as a Black queer person,
mhm,
the experiences in general of Black Americans, um, bringing him with me to Black Lives Matters protests, sharing content, explaining on and on and on, and having these kinds of conversations.
yeah.
How how do you a get through to someone, um and how do you stop being exhausted from the betrayals?
Um, so I think part of it is okay, I'm like channeling the non-identifying Buddhist when I say this inside of me is part of your frustration is coming from ego, is that you have a desire to convert somebody. You feel like you have an obligation to win them over, but you have no control over that. You can't make you have no control over how a person feels emotionally, politically to what they're exposed to. I suppose the short answer is you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink it. So do you then get frustrated when they don't drink the water? Or do you recognize that, first of all, American conservatism and indeed white supremacy, it's not fake, it's not a facade. It comes from a very real place. It comes from investment in what you call your culture. Humans are cultural organisms. We're invested in our cultural norms and our ways of life, and we find value in those things. And we want to protect those things because they're what create what is normal for us. So when you have a white person who can be exposed to other different perspectives, but he's still invested in his culture, can you win him over? I don't know. And I would say you get exhausted from trying because maybe it's not your place to win him over. He has to figure out those things on his own, right? Like a lot of people don't like to be told the solution to their problems. A lot of people like to figure it out for themselves. So, like, what part of the reason why I don't think Charlie Kirk is so effective overall is because he's trying to tell people what to think and what to feel. I'm not doing any of that. One of the reasons why I find that I'm so effective at winning over conservative people in my classroom is because I'm not trying to win them over. I'm not trying, I don't have this goal of like, I am going to shut you down. You're going to switch over to my side. You need to see how wrong you are, how bad you are. Instead, for me, the approach is just look, this is the history you didn't learn. No one taught this to you. And I encourage you to fact check it live while I'm talking about it. I don't have all of the facts. Sometimes I get my stuff mixed up. Who is it? Linda? Linda fact checked me right here in the chat. And I'm perfectly fine with that. And then that's how people start going, oh, damn, I didn't know about this. I didn't hear about this. I'm seeing this for myself, looking up these things. I'm reading history. And then they're like, okay, now I can make up my own mind. Yeah, no, look, I get why my parents are conservative, but I can't be. I like my friends too much. I like my professors too much. Look at these classes were eye-opening for me, and now my parents are attacking them. And now my parents elected a president that's trying to like attack these institutions because you can see how everything that they're doing just, if anything, just reinforces what's already happening. So I don't think there's really much effort you really need to make to try to win people over. When I think in general, comprehensively, allow a person to make up their mind on their own, and naturally they will figure out what the right answer is. Yeah.
Thank you. Also, just you should go on Olay and Friends. I think you would be a great panelist.
Olay and Friends.
Yes.
Is this an Instagram page?
The show is on YouTube, but
Okay.
it's really good cultural conversations and intelligent conversations, and I think
Yeah.
you would be really great.
Thank you. I'll look into it. Olay and Friends. Let me write that down really quick. Olay.
Yes.
Okay. I'll look into it. Thank you. Feel
Thank
free
you.
to mute. Yeah, and then take the hand raising down. Thank you. If you have another question, feel free to raise your hand. Would anyone else like to ask a question? And I'm still keeping my eye on the chat here on Instagram Live. Um, but anyone else? There's a bunch of people here in the Zoom. Yeah, Linda, hi.
Hi, I have a question. First of all, I thank you for this great conversation. Really appreciate it and appreciate that you're doing this. Um, I have a question about, when we talk about white supremacy and how pervasive it is and what people, white and non-white alike, are taught in this country, do we really think that it's something that is actively taught, or is it something that's so implicit, which is why some people, maybe not for all people, but for a large portion of people, it's so implicit that that's why they have a hard time grappling with what we're trying to discuss and talk about and dismantle, because it's, yes, it's a lived experience for them, but they can't really name it, and white supremacy and racism are these very loaded terms.
Yeah.
So when you try to have these conversations and name them and talk about it and talk about context and history, they have a really difficult time with that, and recognizing perhaps the lived experiences of non-white people, because that, like you said, that's not their norm,
Yeah.
right? They're living their normative experience. So to even like engage in these discussions, part of that uncomfortability could come from the mere fact that I don't even know what you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. There is an Instagrammer. I would encourage you to follow her if you choose to do so. I'm looking up her name here. Her name is Kylie Brewer, Kylie dot brew like beer, and then an ER on the end. Kylie Brewer has a very unique angle um, on racism in America because she talks about racism growing up conservative and once being a part of the MAGA movement. Um, and she talks about racism in America from the perspective of being a white person and the conversations that are had at the dinner table, the kinds of things that parents say, the kinds of things that white people say when non-white people are not around. And one of the things that she exposes, at least to my understanding, is that there is conscious teaching of white supremacy in white households in that there are parents that denigrate non-white people, that make passive remarks, that make jokes, that uh, express racial hostility that they would either save face or put on a different mask to perform for others when they're outside of their home. And so she exposes a lot of that. She talks about the common things that you will hear in these kinds of households, the kinds of sentiments that parents will say and enforce. And in turn, I've heard at least one of her recent videos. She was saying that she's been receiving death threats from lots of white people because I don't know, she's exposing secrets or something like that. I think Kylie Brewer, while she is only one person, and I think there's a spectrum of values and ideas here, I think she is in fact exposing something that would say to me and to others that when we're talking about white supremacy, and it's very discomforting because it's loaded language and these kinds of things, part of that fragility is coming from weaponizing fragility. It's coming from this conscious awareness that there is a privilege that white people have, that they're invested in keeping that privilege, and that they are going to be protectively hostile in order to preserve access to that privilege and that control. Um, at the same time, it's not just conscious teaching by parents; it's also just social values too. It's the things you see on TV. It's the things that you see in your neighborhoods. Maybe the differences that you see in the gated community, the white community, where everybody owns a home and is part of an HOA. And then you go to the other side of town, and everybody's black and brown, and they live in apartments, and it's run down, and it's a lot poorer. There's a lot more homelessness. There are a lot of what I would describe as ecological things that kind of inform how white people end up in the position. But I don't want to speak from the perspective of a white person when I myself am not white. I see Monica is chiming in with something here. Would you like to just voice it so that the people on Instagram can hear you?
Sure. One of the things that I was kind of thinking about is that I think often white people aren't used to sitting in their own discomfort, and that they don't realize that there is learning to be had in that discomfort. And they're perfectly happy for everybody else to be uncomfortable and everyone else to have unsafe and difficult situations as long as they can be happy and fine and it's okay.
So that's a part of it too. And I would go back to this is what I'm describing in the phenomenon we call hegemonic culture is there is an implicit understanding. Everybody has an understanding of where they're positioned in our culture, in our society, and in this abstract notion, there is a conscious awareness that whiteness is at the center, and everybody else has race, but it's uncomfortable for white people, and it's uncomfortable for everybody, but they get to be uncomfortable, and whiteness doesn't. It's a mixture of a lot of different things. Thank you, Monica, for sharing.
Yeah, I would just say one more thing. I agree with all of that. Thank you for that, both Professor Doyle and Monica. I also think that a part of it is that, yes, some of it's explicit. I think a lot of it's implicit. And I think for not all white people, but certainly some white people, this deconstructing or understanding of what's going on, because a lot of their privilege, at least for some white people, yes, they understand that they have it, but some of it's implicit because they're just used to having it, right? They've never lived any other way. Is that, well, if you want to talk about race or the issues or deconstructing it or how we fix it, that's the labor of non-white people, right? Right. My husband's white, love him to death, but I'm right. I'm the one taking this class. Like I'm the one that's sitting in on this class, right?
Yeah, sure, sure. That's part of it. I don't really have. I think you're right. I don't know what to say. I mean, a person like Monica is here, but a person like Charlie Kirk is not, or at least not to my knowledge, maybe, right? Um, and then the people who are coming into my classroom, some of them are taking it because they're genuinely interested, but others are taking it because they have to fulfill a requirement, right? So I don't know, it's difficult. I don't really know what to say there. Um, it's complicated. That's about the best way I can put it. Um, does anyone else have a question? Want to chime in? Maybe a comment? I'll kind of browse on the in the live here for a second. It says hearing a bit of an echo. Apologies if this has been pointed out. Let me see if I can fix that for you. Um, I'm very sorry about the echo. Um, I will do my best to address that for you. Let's see here. Look it up. Monte Mater, she look it up. She was brought to extreme nationalist purity Christianity. I'm not sure what the context of this conversation is. I don't see any questions in the chat. If you have a question in the chat, feel free to submit. I've got my eyes here. Yeah, another question on Zoom.
Hi, it's me again. Um, so I often grapple with, and this was predating the experience that I've had recently, but as a non-white person, what do you do as an individual with the anger that you feel towards the systems that seem to be consistently not showing up for you in the ways that it shows up for white people?
Yeah, so I will 100% admit to you that I have had personal frustration with the kind of inequality that I have experienced in my own life. And I know that because for me, as a doctorate, as an academic, I know why I'm experiencing these things, right? It would be like a medical doctor who specializes in lung cancer and they have lung cancer, right? And they know what's going on and they can see what's going on. It's like I've had personal frustration with that kind of thing. And I'll tell you, I don't find that it is productive to vent that frustration in a physical way or in an emotional way. Um, because if anything, that's just going to create more damage that is going to reinforce the negative feelings that I have. So instead, for me personally, I have found that my frustration is best addressed by doing what I can to educate others. What I can in the limited capacity of my humanity. I'm only one person. I'm going to take a small axe. I think I posted this on a story on Instagram. I said over at the beginning of the summer break, I'm going to take a small axe and I'm just going to chip away at this tree because I'm tired of this tree. I know I can't completely fell the tree. I'm not going to cut it down all the way, but I'm just going to do what I can to just contribute to chopping this tree down. And what I started doing was I just started posting clips of my lectures. I didn't record my lectures with the intent to post them on social media. I was recording my lectures because of the Palisades fires. And I had students that weren't flying into LA and because their parents didn't want to send them out. And so I was uploading my lectures to YouTube so they could keep up with the class. And then I just realized, hey, I'm gonna take this one clip of what I said and I'm gonna post it on Instagram. And I'm just gonna see how far it goes. And then sure enough, I literally just started building a following over the course of like 3 months. And now I'm about to hit 70,000 subscribers. And I'm like, no, this is how I take this on. This is my calling. My calling is how can I educate everyone? How can I give everyone access to this collegiate level knowledge? They don't have to pay $80,000 for it. For those of you who paid on my Patreon, I'm sorry, I'm building from the ground up. I've never done this before. If you want a refund, I'm happy to give you a refund if you paid for something. But I want to give people free access to college level knowledge that you don't have to apply to LMU. You don't have to wait to get in. I'm just going to give it to you. I'm going to educate you. If you have questions about it, come and ask me just like it would be in a class. And I'm finding success in that. So my approach personally has been, why the fuck am I letting Charlie Kirk, who doesn't even have a fucking associate's degree, and he's got millions of followers, why does he get to do all of this damage? And I'm just letting him. When I'm an educator, I have the subject matter expertise here. I know what he's wrong about. He's pretty much wrong about everything. I have an ethical obligation, a moral obligation, an academic obligation to undermine this. And that's where I'm at. And personally, I am finding emotional fulfillment in something like this. The first day I did this, I only had one person in the Zoom session. The next Zoom session, it was two people. It was Monica and it was somebody else. Now, there at most, what I saw in the number here is 7 people in the Zoom session. Hopefully, next week, when we're talking about media, film and television and radio and comics and all of that, hopefully, there will be more people in my class coming, sitting down, watching these slides. You get access to the slides. There's some extended resources on the Patreon. No, you don't have to pay for it. And then come to class on Sunday and let's talk about it. And I'm finding fulfillment in a way that I'm going to tell you in the context of my personal life. I was ready to quit academia 2 years ago. I quit my tenure track position at St. John's 2 years ago. The way that I quit is infamously on Instagram somewhere. If you type in my name on Google, Julius Doyle, St. John's University, there's an Instagram post somewhere that has my resignation letter. And the way that I submitted it was not the most professional, but I was ready to quit academia. And I wasn't in academia for a while. Found myself on a bunch of film and TV sets. I was on shows with Seth Rogen and Michael B. Jordan and a bunch of other people. and somehow just ended up right back at LMU. And now I'm finding for emotional fulfillment taking this small axe and chopping down this racism tree in a way that I couldn't do at St. John's. So
You should use that as a clip too.
yeah, maybe I should.
Yeah.
Let me see. Is there a question from the Instagram chat? Let me see. What are your thoughts on white supremacy relating to incel mentality? Part of incel mentality, well, it's involuntarily celibate, meaning you want to have like romantic connections and sexual encounters and things like that, and it's involuntary because people are avoiding you. Um, Part of that is because of the nature of that person, the character of that person is off-putting on its own. I don't think every conservative is an incel. I don't think that at all. Do I find personally? Do I find the conservative politics off-putting? Yes, I do myself. I've heard on the dating scene, like on dating apps and things like that, there are lots of people who avoid conservatives, but incels are a different kind of person. Those are the kinds of people who like they don't shower. They're like weeboos and into anime and yeah, I don't know. They're like red pill enthusiasts. These people are unique on their own. I think white supremacy and American conservatism can reinforce a victimhood mentality for them. But I don't necessarily think that like American conservatism is like one to one with incel mentality. There are lots of incels that are progressive too. So like I don't know. That's an interesting question. Somebody said, I love hearing that about educating others. It's what we can and must do. Thank you for this. Absolutely, of course, as much as I can. You know, I like I said, I had personal frustration. I lost my job. Part of the reason why I lost my job at St. John's was because of the COVID pandemic, and what had led up to my resignation was because of economic insecurity from being a graduate student and then having to pay student loans, but then coming from a historically impoverished background that didn't give me the, and so it was like a domino effect that led up to, I finally got the career that I had been working so hard for, and now I can't even enjoy it because I'm getting hit with the inertia of all of the systemic racism I was trying to avoid. So I have personal frustration with it, but the best way is to use my expertise and just eat Charlie Kirk. So that's what I do on my channel. I can eat them, so I will eat them. And if I ever end up on a debate stage with this person, he's going to be my steak dinner. And I mean that in a rhetorical way, not a literal way. You will see. You will see that I will mop the floor with this person. And I've been holding back on a lot of things on content on my social media because I don't want them to be prepared to have all of these different angles to think about responses. I want you to be caught off guard when I start saying what I'm saying, and you have no responses to it. And it's almost like I'm dunking your head in this dirty bucket of water and I'm cleaning up this mess that you made with the milk. And I'm using you to do it. And again, I mean that metaphorically. I don't mean to encourage violence or anything like that. I do not advocate violence. I do not encourage that. But if I ever end up on a stage with this person, you will literally see me mop the floor with him. Um, Knowledge production is one concept that pops up when thinking about these paradigms and logic. Yeah, sure. I don't know if that's a question though. So if you're elaborating, I'll scroll down for it. Best book to start reading for someone who cares about the truth and history, and with a short attention span. Well, I don't know. I think books, if you have a short attention span but you want to read books, maybe Audible is the best route to go. But for me, I have so many books in my library that like it just becomes about honing down on the topic. I am an avid nonfiction reader, and I don't have like broad covering books. I have books that are on African Americans in baseball. I have Native Americans in feminism and indigenous culture. I've got Black archaeology. I've got queer theory. I've got the sensuous man and the sensuous woman. I've got books in Japanese because I like to read in Japanese sometimes. It's a thing where it's like you would have to ask me like for a specific topic, what book do you recommend? Because I don't have like broad. Charlie Kirk is such a piece of shit. He's paid to push this false narrative. Yes, he is, and he's found a niche. And I mean, yes, he is paid to push a narrative. Yeah, I kind of think he's a piece of shit too, but I shy away from that flamboyant language. Um, he's found a niche, and like I said, part of that niche comes from if white supremacy is to stay relevant, the thing that's undermining white supremacy so effectively is college. These people have to send their children to college because they want their children to have a good quality education and to be critical thinkers. But then the problem is, once you endow your children with critical thinking faculties, they then see through the bullshit of white supremacy. And then they come home and they're not conservative anymore. And then now these people are attacking colleges. So part of the reason why Charlie Kirk is going after college students is because I teach them. Does that make sense? Right. Um, any other questions? I want to wrap up here. I don't want to force any questions on the Zoom side, but I would love everybody who came here in the Zoom chat, whether you had a question or not. Thank you so much for coming and showing me support and seeing my slides and just being here for me. I really appreciate that. Um, and I hope I've at least it motivated you, given you a reason to come back next week, um, just to be here. Vera, do you have a question?
Oh no, I just wanted to thank you for your time. I'm also a professor in San Diego at San Diego Mesa College, and this is my first time sitting in the Zoom with you, but I've been following your content for some time now. But I just wanted to reach out and say thank you because everything that you are saying on white supremacy, especially within the classroom dynamics, is definitely what's happening to me as well as in my classroom as well. We just started our first week, and I've already had, like you said, the white students drop out when they see my reading list. Particular students coming up to me, the white Charlie Kirk, admirers that already want to debate me, even though it was just going over the syllabus, and my syllabus is of Ashada Shakur, Che Guevara, Malcolm X, Toni Morrison, Bell Hooks, Roxane Gay. And like you said, for them to sit with that, being uncomfortable. And I tell them the same thing that you tell them, like, we're going to be uncomfortable in this class, sit with it as well. And if this isn't the class for you, then maybe you should look for another class. Some leave and some are staying. So I just want to let you know that we're fighting that over here in San Diego as well. And thank you so much. And I'll definitely tune in again next week. So this was my first time. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. One of the things I wanted to kind of add to what you were saying, I had one student that I would characterize as like a conservative Charlie Kirk enthusiast that stuck through my class the entire duration. And it's interesting because at certain points he would try to debate me, um, but he was doing well in my class. He was getting the answers right, critically thinking and evaluating. And so it was very interesting for me because it's like, if you are able, one of the things that I do in my class is I don't like my students to regurgitate everything that I've said, but to take the concepts that we are learning and then apply the logic of those concepts in a nuanced way. And so when you can do that, that tells me you understand. And so you therefore succeed in the class. And he was doing quite well. And through to the end, he still maintained this sort of Charlie Kirk enthusiast demeanor. And so it was very interesting for me as how is it that you're able to reconcile the ideas you're learning in this class that is clearly demonstrating that you are succeeding, you're passing, but you still hold on to these values? I don't know. And I never got to ask him that because I don't I don't have an agenda, and I'm not trying to confront my students in that way. I just want to be a knowledgeable resource. But also B, I don't like to create an environment of political persecution in my classroom. So I'm never going to ask him that. I didn't even get the opportunity. But it's one thing that I often reflect on is like, how can you understand critical race theory, understand how to apply interest convergence, understand African American history? We're looking at politics. You're learning how to apply political reasoning and thinking in the ways that produce racial equity. And then you go right back to Charlie Kirk. And it's like, I don't know. It's interesting. But
Yeah.
thank you so much.
Thank you.
So yeah, let's go ahead and we'll let me see if I can get one more. Does anyone have one more question? What can I do to actively battle white supremacy? I protest, try to spread as much information as possible, and I even boycott companies that are in support of white supremacy or unsavory. Um, I think it's about what you can do in your own proximity, right? I don't encourage, I don't think that fighting people, like debating people with rhetorical confrontation and combat, is productive to winning them over. So if you want to educate people, direct them to somebody like me, who maybe I'm debating people in the comment section of a post or something, but when you're like talking to me or like we're talking about lectures and things like that, I'm not debating anybody. Feel free to send them my way and allow me to be the educational resource that promotes more expansive understanding. In your own capacity, though, maybe that's in your job, maybe that's in your daily life or something like that. Perhaps it's a protest, but then also, what can you do to cultivate substantive change in a non confrontational, non combative way, too? Start exploring what that means. I don't know what your life is like. I'm talking to Maddie here. Um, I don't know what your life is like in the day to day. I encourage you to join next week's Zoom session if you want to, and you can have a back and forth with me like some of these other individuals are. But even for the people that are here, start reflecting on in your limited capacity. You cannot do everything. You're not God. Nobody is. What can you do to to cultivate substantive change towards a more fair, just, and equal society for everybody, right? Um, the idea of white dispersion ending white supremacy. Yeah, yeah, right. Um, but it's not about attacking white people, attacking whiteness, delegitimizing white identity. We're not doing any of that. Instead, what we are trying to do is we are trying to scientifically evaluate the conditions of the racial ecological environment and understand them so that we can undermine the production of racial inequality. Okay? And so, as we currently understand our racial ecological landscape, whiteness is positioned at the center where all others are on the outside. Whiteness has privilege, all others have lesser privilege by comparison. How do we then move to level the playing field? It's about equality. It is not about producing inequality. And as long as we keep that in mind, then I encourage you, in what limited capacity in your life can you work to cultivate substantive change around you? It's going to start with you. It's only ever going to change around you. And if you keep that in mind, then you can effectuate change. Okay, we'll leave it there. Um, I uh, I thank you so much for joining in on the Zoom session. Now that I know to post the link on my link tree for the following seminar discussions, just keep a lookout for the updated link on my link tree if you don't want to join my Patreon. And then if you do want to join my Patreon, if you want to read more about these resources or something like that, you can join my Patreon for free. There's some people, for some reason, Patreon wants to make money. So it seems like they're like charging people $5 fees. There is a way for you to become a member to my page for free without paying a dime. Okay. You can have access to these resources, extended reading resources, the YouTube lectures. This recorded lecture will also be uploaded tomorrow. You can have access to these things for free. Please encourage people to use these as a learning resource. And I will see you all next week. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you for supporting me. You guys take care. I look forward to it.